The evening sun had begun its slow descent, spilling its fading light through the thin lace curtains that hung over the small window. The light was soft, almost fragile, as if it too carried the weight of memory. It painted the room in hues of amber and gold, falling gently across the wooden walls that had stood for decades, across shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and faded photographs whose faces had begun to blur with time. The air inside was still, except for the quiet creak of the beams as the day shifted into night and the distant song of crickets rising from the grass outside. In the middle of the room sat an old woman, her back curved with age, her hair silver and gathered into a simple knot, her hands folded loosely upon her lap. Those hands, once nimble and strong, were now wrinkled and marked by the years. Skin as thin as parchment stretched over veins that carried the stories of a lifetime. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of decades of work and sacrifice. Her eyes, though dulled with age, still held a quiet fire. A softness that had survived sorrow, a tenderness shaped by loss. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, yet still carried within them the warmth of love. At her side, seated cross-legged upon a woven mat, was her grandchild. The child's face was a canvas of curiosity, every blink and tilt of the head filled with wonder. They fiddled absent-mindedly with a small carved toy, but their gaze often returned to the grandmother, wide and expectant. The child's presence filled the room with a gentle energy, innocence meeting experience, the young gazing at the old with questions too large for words. From time to time the child reached out, resting a small hand upon the grandmother's own, as if to anchor her here in the present, to keep her from drifting too far into the depths of memory. The grandmother's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It was not the smile of carefree joy, but one that carried tenderness tempered by fatigue. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and slow, with a texture like worn cloth. Every word seemed to come from deep within her chest, heavy with both the ache of years and the wisdom they had given her. "My child," she began, her tone almost like a whisper carried on the evening air. "Do you know how many stories live inside me? More than I can count. More than there are stars in the sky above us." She paused, glancing toward the window where the light had grown softer still, a dying flame against the coming night. Most of them are not the kind you will find in books. They are not tales of princes and palaces. No, mine are stories of earth and fire, of tears and hunger, of love that grew even in the darkest places. They are heavy, sometimes painful, but they are also the reason you are here, breathing beside me now. The child's eyes widened, the toy forgotten in their lap. They leaned closer, their little fingers curling around one of the grandmother's weathered hands. "Tell me," the child said softly, the plea carrying both innocence and urgency. "Tell me one." The grandmother let the silence linger. She gazed at the shadows flickering against the walls, at the photographs whose faces seemed to lean forward from the past, watching her. Her thumb brushed against the child's tiny knuckles, marveling at the warmth of young skin against old. Finally, she drew in a long breath, the sound like the opening of a door long closed. "Then listen carefully," she said, "because once I open these memories, they will not be mine alone. They will belong to you as well. They are the threads that bind us, my life, my pain, my hope. All of it, flowing into you." The child nodded solemnly. as though entrusted with a great secret. Their eyes gleamed in the dimming light, reflecting the golden threads of dusk. The grandmother closed her own eyes for a moment, as if searching through the corridors of memory. When she opened them again, they were not looking at the room but far beyond it, into another time, another place. Her voice softened, carrying the rhythm of the past. I was born in a village where hunger was as common as the sunrise. My first memories are not of toys or games, but of the rumble of empty stomachs and the sound of my mother's sighs as she tried to stretch what little food we had into enough to keep us alive. We had nothing, yet somehow we laughed. Somehow there was still light. As she spoke, the room seemed to change. The child's imagination painted her words into images. Fields stretching wide beneath a pale sky, a small barefoot girl running through tall grass with a basket in her hand, her hair wild and her clothes patched but her eyes bright. The grandmother's voice carried the weight of those days, but all a strange tenderness, as though even sorrow, once endured, could take on a kind of beauty in memory. I remember the mornings, she continued, when the air was cool and the world smelled of earth and dew. I would run to gather berries, my feet wet from the grass, my heart racing with the thought of bringing something home. Sometimes there would be only a handful, not enough to fill even the corner of the basket. But when I placed them in my mother's hands, her eyes would shine as though I had given her treasure. The child listened in silence, every word carving itself into their heart. They squeezed the grandmother's hand gently, as though to say, I am here. I am listening. The grandmother felt the small hand against her own and allowed herself a quiet smile. Her gaze turned again toward the distant window where the last rays of sunlight were slipping away, and her voice dropped lower, almost like a confession. Happiness, my dear, does not wait for full bellies or fine clothes. It hides in laughter and in fireflies dancing at dusk, in the warmth of a hand that holds yours when you are afraid. Even when life is hard, and it was very hard, there are still moments of light. Remember that. The child's brow furrowed in thought. Their lips parted, forming the question before it came. But, were you happy, Grandma? Even when you were hungry? The grandmother's eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed to see not just her grandchild, but also the little girl she had once been. Yes, she said quietly. I was happy, in my own way, because happiness is not something given. It is something you choose to see, even when the world is dark. But, her voice faltered, her gaze shifting away. The world does not stay kind for long. The last of the evening light slipped from the window, leaving the room bathed in the glow of a small lamp flickering in the corner. The grandmother's hand tightened gently around the child's. Shadows deepened, and with them came the weight of the next story, waiting to be told. The oil lamp flickered in the corner, throwing long shadows across the wooden walls. The child leaned closer to the grandmother now, their eyes wide and unblinking, as though they feared to miss a single word. Outside, the sound of crickets swelled, and from far away came the faint bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves shifting in the evening breeze. The world beyond the little house seemed distant, irrelevant. Here, in this room, time had slowed to match the rhythm of her voice. I was very young, the grandmother began, her voice carrying the slow cadence of memory. Perhaps no older than you are now when I first learned what it meant to live with hunger. We were poor, so poor that sometimes my belly ached until I thought I could not bear it. My brothers and sisters and I would sit at the table waiting for a meal that often never came. We chewed on pieces of bread as hard as stone, dipped in water to soften them, and pretended it was enough. Our stomachs rumbled, but we laughed anyway. Children can laugh through hunger, though it does not make the ache go away. Her hand shifted slightly in the child's grasp, her thumb tracing slow circles on the small knuckles. Her eyes drifted toward the ceiling, as though she could see the rafters of another house. Long ago, another life. Our home was no bigger than this one. Wooden walls that creaked when the wind blew. A roof patched with whatever we could find. When it rained, water would drip through the holes, and we would place pots beneath them to catch the drops. At night, when the wind howled, I would curl against my mother's side and pretend her warmth was enough to keep away the cold. The child's face softened with pity. "Didn't you get sick, Grandma, with no food and no warm house?" A faint smile curved across the grandmother's lips. The kind of smile that carries more sorrow than joy. "We did. Often. Coughs that rattled our chests. Fevers that left us weak. But sickness was part of life then. We did not think of doctors or medicines. We only thought of surviving the next day, the next season. My mother's hands worked from dawn until night, and still she often had nothing to put on the table. Yet she never stopped trying. She never let us forget that we were loved. Her eyes grew distant, and her voice lowered into something almost like a song. I can still see her hands, rough and cracked, darkened by sun and soil, always busy, sewing, cooking, gathering, washing. Hands that carried more weight than they should have, and yet, when they touched me, they were gentle. Those hands taught me what love meant. They were the first lesson I ever learned about sacrifice. For a moment, the grandmother fell silent. The child waited, not daring to speak, sensing the heaviness of the pause. The room seemed to bend around the memory, drawing in close, until the only sound was the creak of the floorboards beneath the old woman's rocking chair. Then she continued, her words flowing more freely. As if once opened, the flood of memory could not be stopped. I remember the mornings most clearly. The air was sharp and cool, the kind of air that stings your lungs and makes your breath visible. The sky would be pale, washed with light, and the grass still heavy with dew. I would take the little basket my mother gave me, its handle frayed and splintered, and run out into the fields. My bare feet would grow wet and cold, but I did not care. I was searching for food, for berries, wild greens, and anything the earth might grant us. Sometimes I found only a few shriveled fruits, hardly enough to fill a child's bandiktitin, but when I ran home with them, holding them high as though they were treasure, my mother's eyes would soften. She would kiss my forehead and tell me I had done well. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. To a hungry child, a handful of berries can feel like a feast. We would sit in a circle, my brothers, my sisters, my parents, and share them between us. Each berry was divided, each one savored slowly, as though it were the sweetest thing in the world. And do you know what? To us, it was. The child's lips parted, their brow furrowing. You had to share one berry with everyone? The grandmother nodded. Yes. And I learned then that joy is not measured by how much you have, but by how deeply you cherish the little you are given. Even hunger cannot take that away. Her eyes drifted again toward the window, where the faintest traces of twilight still lingered, a bruise of purple across the sky. There were times when the hunger grew so sharp it felt like knives in my belly. I would lie awake at night, pressing my hands to my stomach, listening to the sighs of my siblings as they tossed in their sleep. The darkness seemed endless then, but even in those nights, there were moments of light. Sometimes my father would hum an old song, low and steady, and his voice would carry us into sleep. Other times we would whisper stories to each other, imagining feasts and banquets that we knew we would never see. And still we laughed. That laughter was our shield. It kept despair from swallowing us whole. The child's eyes glistened, though they did not yet understand the depth of what they were hearing. They only knew their grandmother's words, painted pictures both strange and sorrowful, and yet somehow beautiful. They pressed their small hand tighter against hers, as though to hold her steady in the telling. Happiness hides in strange places, the grandmother said softly. It hides in the morning dew, in the sound of frogs croaking after rain, in a shared smile over a crust of bread. We were poor beyond measure, but we were rich in the ways that mattered. We had each other. We had love. The oil lamp sputtered, and for a moment the flame bent low, casting the room in deeper shadow. The grandmother fell silent again, her eyes heavy with memories too numerous to count. Then she whispered, as though speaking only to herself, "But the world does not stay kind for long." The lamp's flame wavered, as though stirred by her words, and the child pressed closer to her side. The warmth of the small fingers against her worn hand pulled her gently back to the present, yet her eyes had already gone far away. They were fixed on a world that no longer existed, a place smouldering in memory. Her breath deepened, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to make the room smaller, heavier, as though sorrow itself had entered with her story. There was a night, she said slowly, that split my life into two pieces, the before and the after. I was not much older than you are now. We had been living with hunger, with hardship, yes, but we still laughed. We still had each other. Then the fire came, and with it, the world we knew was gone. The child tilted their head, their lips parting. Fire? Yes, the grandmother whispered. A fire set by barns that carried weapons. Men whose faces I did not know, whose language I barely understood. War had been a distant murmur before that night. A story the adults whispered about when they thought we children could not hear. But then it arrived at our door, without warning, without mercy. Her voice faltered, and for a moment she closed her eyes. When she opened them, they glistened with unshed tears. I remember the smell before I saw the flames. Smoke. Thick. Choking. Heavy in the air. I woke to shouting, the sound of boots pounding the earth, the cries of neighbors calling out in panic. Then the light, orange and terrible, filling the sky, devouring the roofs of homes I had known all my life. The child's breath caught. They had never seen war, never smelled smoke that carried destruction. To them, fire was a gentle thing, a flame in a lamp, a crackling hearth on cold nights. But the way their grandmother spoke, fire was something alive and monstrous. A beast that swallowed everything in its path. I remember clutching my sister's hand. The grandmother continued. She was so small then, her hair tangled, her face streaked with tears. She cried, asking me where Mama was, where Papa was, and I had no answer. All I knew was that the heat pressed against us from every side, the night broken by screams. People ran, carrying what little they could snatch in their arms, but it was never enough. The fire was faster. It took what it wanted. Her hand trembled in the child's, and the child, sensing the sorrow, pressed closer, resting their cheek against the grandmother's arm. The grandmother's eyes softened at the touch, but her words did not pause. They came steady now, like water flowing from a cracked vessel. We ran through the village, my sister and I. The smoke stung my eyes until they burned. Sparks fell upon us like angry stars. I heard the roof of our home groan, then collapse, the sound like thunder. I turned only once, and what I saw, her voice caught. She swallowed hard before continuing. What I saw was the place of my childhood, swallowed whole. The roof, the walls, the wooden table where we had laughed, the corner where my mother kept her sewing, all gone in an instant, a black shadow against the fire. The child lifted their head, whispering, "Where were your parents?" The grandmother's lips pressed tightly together. For a long moment she did not answer, her gaze fixed on the flickering flame of the lamp, as though drawing strength from its light. When she spoke again, her words were quiet, but each one struck like a stone dropped into water. I never saw my father again after that night. He had gone out, they said, to try and hold back the men, to protect us. My mother, she was with us for a while. I remember her arms around me, her voice shouting for me to run. Then there was only chaos, shouts, fire, the crush of bodies. I lost her hand in the smoke. I searched, but she was gone. Tears pricked the corners of the child's eyes, though they did not fully understand. They grip. Tear pricked the corners of the child's eyes, though they did not fully understand. They gripped the grandmother's hand with all their strength, as if trying to anchor her to the present. That's so sad, Grandma, they whispered. Weren't you so scared? Yes, the grandmother said softly. I was terrified. My legs trembled. My breath came in gasps. My sister clung to me, crying so loudly. I feared we would be found. Fear wrapped itself around me like a chain. But do you know what, my child? She turned her tired eyes toward the child, letting the silence hold for a moment. Fear cannot feed you. Fear cannot keep your loved ones alive. I learnt that night that even when your heart is breaking, you must keep moving. You must survive, because survival is the only way to keep love alive. Her voice dropped lower, a whisper edged with steel. I carried my sister on my back that night, though my body was small and weak. Step by step, we stumbled through the fields, away from the smoke, away from the shouting. My tears blurred the path, but I kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I told myself, if I fall, she will fall. If I stop, she will be lost. So I did not stop. The lamp flickered again. its flame bowing low before straightening, as though it too listened. The grandmother's voice grew softer, the edges smoothing with the distance of years. When dawn came, the sky was grey with ash. The village was gone. The people who had survived sat in silence, their faces streaked with soot, their eyes hollow. We had lost our homes, our families, everything that tied us to the earth. Yet somehow we still breathed, and so we walked forward, though every step was taken through grief. The child's eyes were round and glistening, their throat tight with words they did not know how to say. At last, they managed a trembling whisper. "What happened to you, sister?" The grandmother's gaze softened. A small smile flickered on her lips, though it was a smile lined with sorrow. "I kept her alive, for a time. She was the reason I did not fall when my legs ached, the reason I found food when my belly was empty. But the world was harsh, and sometimes love is not enough to keep someone safe. She left me too soon. But that, my child, is another story." She fell silent, her eyes glimmering in the lamplight, and for a while the only sound in the room was the steady chorus of crickets outside. The child pressed against her side, silent, their small hearts struggling to carry the weight of the story. The grandmother's hand rested on their head, her fingers gentle despite the tremor that lingered in them. "The night of fire," she whispered, almost to herself, "was when I learned that life can be torn apart in an instant. But it was also when I learned the strength hidden inside us, the strength we do not know we have until there is no other choice." The lamp burned low, its flame steady now, casting the two of them in its fragile glow. The child closed their eyes against her arm, their breath soft, their little hand still gripping hers. The grandmother's gaze lingered on the window where the night pressed close, her thoughts lost once more to the ashes of the past.